Hello, audience. You're listening to the Breadcrumbs to Passion podcast, where we give you the breadcrumbs to your passion by inspiring you with deeper and connected conversations for you to have fun and live wholeheartedly.
Hi, I'm Amanda Giebel.
And I'm Jason French, your host of the Breadcrumbs to Passion podcast. I believe we're live.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us in this week's episode number 6, Being Adaptable in Uncertainty.
Awesome. Such a great topic to be starting today, this week's podcast in regards to facing adversity. I know that there's a lot of people currently out there who are struggling in particular around this particular area, once again, on facing adversity. You know, like it's a big thing. So what do you think is something that's really important for people to understand about being adaptable in adversity, Amanda?
I think we need to take the time to understand the situation. So sometimes we can be really reactive in, if something's presented to us in a state where, it's like hurry, 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 but we haven't had a chance to even process it, and then we could be reactive to the situation, rather than if we could take a step back and understand that what's coming at us, take a breath and then readjust and come up with a new solution, rather than just being like someone comes at you and you just fly off the handle and outpour your emotions or your feelings without even understanding what's just going on.
Yeah, that's actually very true. So being adaptable in adversity, are you saying is a lot of it's linked around how we show up emotionally?
Yeah, like having an emotional intelligent balance is important in any situation. Say it's at work or in a relationship or with your children. Like coming from a place where it's not just like verbal diarrhea, like coming out and you just, it's saying something because something's been triggered in you to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that what you're saying there is the defense turns into reaction. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. Yes. When rather that emotional intelligence is if we can really sit with what's actually going on instead of that straight out, reactiveness or defensiveness.
Yeah. So there was another thing that you were talking about as well around when obviously adversity comes towards us. There's obviously something for us to pick up. Like to me, I see it as like how we show up in adversity is something for us to learn about ourselves.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it shows to me that we could be out of alignment in some particular area of our life. And that's what adversity is here for, is for us to see it and go, actually, I'm not congruent, or I'm not actually in that place of conviction on this particular thing or this particular area or whatever it is. So adversity always shows up for us to be able to see what is our values. So I think that a lot of people will struggle to see that, is that when they're faced with adversity, they're not realizing that their values are being challenged. Now, I was given a really beautiful analogy around this over the weekend that I thought of around this particular area. And it was the difference between when a hurricane comes, the difference between a house and a tree.
Yeah.
What do you think is the difference? But which one goes first? Like, does the tree get uprooted or does the house get moved in a hurricane? Which one would you think is the one that would go first?
The house.
Why?
Because it has no structure that is earthed.
Beautiful.
So I guess, we look at a house where it's got structure, but there's nothing deep rooted to hold us down. Whereas a tree, we can have those roots deeply ingrained or deeply in the earth to keep us stable.
Absolutely. And so the power of foundations is really important, and those ground roots, because if you don't have those in adversity, then literally everything else that's above the ground, built above the ground with a structure, is all superficial. It will easily collapse. And that's what you'll probably find when you're facing adversity, no matter what area of your life is. If you don't have that ground roots in there, those foundations that you've actually put into play, then you'll find it'll be a lot harder for you to show up in adversity. So hence why conviction then comes through those ground roots. And the other thing that comes forward, obviously, is that consistency. So being consistent in your conviction is really, really powerful when it comes to adversity.
Yeah, I think actually taking on new challenges as well. So make it a habit to take on new challenges in life. If we get stuck doing the same things and we're not opening our mind to be challenged, how are we going to show up when these challenges actually come? So if we can take on, just maybe one new thing a week, like let's just start basic, or one new thing a month, and get really good at, navigating through that challenge. Because if we can start building that habit, then it's going to make it easier when these things just come out of nowhere, like the hurricane, blow us off track or whatever, and the structure starts to wobble, that we're deeply rooted into the ground.
Absolutely. So the power of that, I think, also is understanding about, I think the power of that is really understanding what is most important. Do you know what I mean? Like when you're facing adversity, like we said before. So we've got to be aware that we don't get caught in distractions and facing challenges, because I think that's a fine nuance for a lot of people. They think that distractions are like adapting them to something new in adversity, and it's not necessarily. They're just distractions. So I think one of the most powerful things that I've picked up, especially through my own journey, as well as obviously supporting others, is the consistency comes through their conviction. And when you know what that true north is, or your true calling is, I think what you'll find is the challenges that you're talking about is more about building a muscle to obviously create that foundation stronger. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it's just different tools to be able to, like, when big things come our way, how we can handle and navigate through that. So say the hurricane comes, how can we build ourselves up to be able to sustain the winds of the hurricane?
Absolutely. Sustainability is a very, very powerful word used in that particular way as well. I love that. That's great. So what do you think could actually support someone with a tool, for instance, to be able to move them in facing adversity or facing the uncertainty?
Yeah, I think like comes when we're talking about that emotional intelligence, is like really understanding the situation for what it is. And so active listening rather than, just being reactive, is just taking that time to understand and to listen correctly as to what's being said, and being able to communicate in a way that's not rushed or not rash. So it's like, if you feel that triggering of emotions, or that anger or something's coming up for you, boiling to the surface, is to understand that in yourself first, instead of relaying that onto someone else.
Absolutely. I think that's actually really, really important. I don't understand how people do that. Well, I do, because I work in that particular area. But what I'm saying is, I don't understand how people struggle to not see the importance of emotional intelligence. It's one of the things that I think that a lot of people have, I suppose, how could I put this? It's like, what I believe, what we invest in is what we manifest.
Yeah.
So if you're investing in, obviously, if you don't invest in understanding your emotional triggers or understanding yourself, then obviously you're going to end up with manifesting different scenarios in your life that create that uncertainty. You're in that living in an unpredictable world all the time. Now, the best thing that I find through that is when you are predictable in the unpredictability.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I know a lot of people see that as being strange because they're like, well, if someone's unpredictable and you're being predictable, then it's like they've got power control over you, and they actually don't. What happens with that is it's a consistency, there's conviction. So the unpredictable, while you dance with them in avoidance, then that's makes that harder for anything to come to fruition, you know, especially in those times of uncertainty. Like, it's really important that people understand, like we were saying before, about that investment. So the best tool I see in that is investing in your emotional intelligence, understanding who you are. It's really important.
Well, I would like add a side note onto that, and it's being really structured and like routine based in what you do every day. Because if we are balanced in what we do every day, well, then that's also a tool to be able to cope with adversity, especially with what's going on in the world. We've got to treat it like, you know, just because we're in lockdown doesn't mean we have to drink 6 bottles of wine just to get through it. You know what I mean? It's like, just, well, it's still the same. It's just a couple of things are a little bit out of the ordinary. Like, we can't go to the shops. Great. Let's look at that as a win, because now we can concentrate on either doing something more productive or doing something that is creative, like we haven't done in a long time. So using that time wisely to use your brain rather than to be unproductive. So, you know, finding something creative to balance out the rush, which we normally are in.
Awesome. So just to round up today's episode, because we're hit that spot. So just to round up today's episode around this particular area of being adaptable in uncertainty, what do you think could be something that our listeners would be able to thrive with?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence, changing behavior of not being reactive. So understanding from a place where you're actually really listening to what's going on. And if you feel that bubbling of emotions, or, you know, that knee jerk, like, I've got to say something here, just pull it back a little bit. And with that, you know, we're all learning and growing. So if that's not where you're at, well, then let's take that back a few steps and put some structure and routine into your normal everyday living, so these things are less massive or less like a hurricane when they do come about.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The biggest thing that I find a lot of people do in adversity is they create more chaos. So it's that, like you said, and it is actually a trauma response. So my challenge to the listeners would be to, when you actually see what's coming up for you, like Amanda said, what reactions are coming up for you, observe them in a way that is not judgmental. It's completely non-judgmental, of just allowing it. I always believe, even in your shadow, you have to learn to love your shadow. Otherwise, your shadow will keep biting you on the butt. So it's kind of like, love your shadow for what it is, not what you want it to be necessarily. The same thing as your own light. So everything has a two-sided, as such, you know, there's a light and dark side to everything that we do in life. So in adversity, it's the same thing. So in your light, how can you show up in the uncertainty? And the other thing is, when you are triggered in that, understand what it's actually trying to tell you, because it could be, if you're someone that can't listen to it coming from love, you can only understand it coming from, you know, fear, then obviously the way you're going to interpret things is through fear. Like that's the way you're going to do it. Until you learn a different way, which is to learn to come from a place of love, which comes down to those things that I always say, the science. You get a feather, you get a rock, you get a brick, and then you get a truck. If you ignore all of them, then watch out. Goodness gracious me. Like, that's showing up in uncertainty, worse than the house and the uprooted tree. Like, you really have to take that into account. How many signs do you need for you to see how uncertainty is not supporting you?
Make the change.
In the way that you're showing up. So how many times do you need to see that? Because I find that so much in adversity or in uncertainty, people I hear the same story. Like the amount of times I've heard the same story around the same thing, and it's usually got to do with them being vulnerable. So they're in fear of vulnerability, so they feel powerless in vulnerability, and that creates the addiction. So they have this addiction to powerlessness, so they work on a superficial level. And that I think is really, really interesting to watch as well. So so there's some of the key tips. Is like I'm saying, they're the ones that would help you with the 3 C's that I believe in. Is obviously conviction, conviction, congruency, and the last one, consistency. So I believe if you have those 3, you can come into alignment. If you're out of alignment, check in with those other 3 areas.
Check in with the way things are coming up in life. Check in with the feelings. Check in with the emotional intelligence.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our session for today. So thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to sharing with you next week on our next episode.
Love and light.
Be brave and be the change. Bye for now.
Bye. The information contained in this presentation is of a general nature and based on presenters' personal experiences. It does not constitute specific advice. Always seek individual expert opinion to help with your specific needs and situation.